And welcome to the North Carolina Tar Heels on SI podcast. I'm your host, Grant Chachere, and I'm also the lead beat writer here for North Carolina Tar Heels on SI. We're going to be doing a daily podcast here to discuss the latest news in UNC football, basketball, and baseball, and also we'll touch on some other sports as well, because UNC Chapel Hill is a university full of not only academic excellence but athletic excellence. So we'll also make sure to include the other sports as well when necessary. For example, women's soccer. They're always winning all the time, and when they win, we're going to talk about it. But it's mostly going to be about football, basketball, and baseball, especially basketball, right? And I know it's football season, but I think everybody wants to hear my takes on UNC basketball. That will come very, very soon. But I'm very excited to be here. I'm very excited to be the beat writer right here on this website covering the UNC Tar Heels. And I'm just very grateful for this opportunity. The reason why I have this background here, and it's really weird. I'm not a big fan of it. I don't know. But it's because I'm in the process of moving. I will be in Chapel Hill on Monday. First, I'm traveling to the Memphis area to attend a wedding. A family friend of mine, and then from there I'm gonna drive straight to North Carolina, find an apartment, get settled in. It should be easy peasy, and of course, all that's happening. Of course, you get ACC Media Days, all right? So I'm gonna have to be moving, but also keeping up to date on what's going on with ACC Media Days. And you already know that North Carolina is going to be the talk of the town, and we'll get to that on Tuesday. Well, I'll go through, kind of a preview what to expect for North Carolina during media days. What kind of questions that will be asked. It'll also be Gio Lopez's first major media appearance, so we'll get to hear from him, and also we'll just get to hear of what UNC's plans are for recruiting. You really get the idea of what's going on in Chapel Hill, especially when you have a guy like Bill Belichick, who is a very well-known stoic and really doesn't like to give a whole lot of information. Historically, just look at any press conference he ever did with the Patriots. So we'll talk about that on tomorrow's show. But today's show, we are going to talk about what the expectations for the Tar Heels should be on the gridiron, right? And yes, I know they're not UNC basketball. I know UNC basketball, of course, has really high expectations. Just look at the trophy cases. But football, for the football team, you have Bill Belichick. Bill Belichick has won the most Super Bowls in NFL history. He's won 6. No other coach, by the way, has won more than 4. That was Chuck Noll from the Pittsburgh Steelers. And a lot of people are wondering, can he turn it around? Can he adjust to the college football, coaching in college football, especially when the landscape is always changing because of NIL and the transfer portal? Can he relate to college kids? Can he? I mean, there's a whole lot of stuff that goes into what can and not make Bill Belichick successful here in Chapel Hill. There's a lot of stuff, of course, that has to fall in place. I mean, it's a process. Rome wasn't built in one day. When Nick Saban went to Alabama, they went 7-6 his first year, and also lost against ULM. And even if you go to during the time at LSU, the second or third game of the year, they lost against UAB. There's a lot of different examples of coaches going to a job and not necessarily succeeding at first. It's very rare you see a coach, do a bang-on job the first year. I mean, the only one I can think of from my recent memory is Gus Malzahn at Alabama. I mean, not Alabama, at Auburn. But things never really picked up from there, of course, when they went to the national championship. After they had 2 straight games of miraculous, all-time great plays, which was the Hail Mary against Georgia and, of course, the kick 6 against Alabama. So there's that, right? You got the new coach aspect, and not only a new coach, but one who you could consider to be you could consider one of the greatest coaches of all time, regardless of level, and also one of the greatest defensive strategists in modern football history, regardless of level. Then you have to look at the aspect for North Carolina is that they only have a handful of returning starters from last year, right? A lot of guys you either graduated or they hit the transfer portal, right? For example, in the quarterback room, the only scholarship quarterback that has experience that was already at North Carolina is Mac Johnson. But Mac Johnson's not. I don't know how he's dealing with his body because remember he broke his leg last year. So it's still going to be some adjustment period. Gio Lopez is the only quarterback on this roster that has experience. All the rest have never gotten a single rep on the roster or haven't yet. Right. For example, Bryce Barker just got to campus during the spring. And then on top of that, you only return 2 starters on the defensive side of the ball. So there's a lot of stuff you have to replace. And also, Amari Campbell, of course, we all know, hit the transfer portal, right? So even the better players you had coming back, they hit the transfer portal. So you have to replace a whole lot. Now, I'm not saying there isn't talent on this roster. I'm not saying they're extremely talented, but there's some guys who have had great production at either the previous stops or currently at Carolina. But you also have to replace a back-to-back 1,500-yard rusher, Amari in Hampton. Can Davion Gauze handle that kind of pressure? I mean, there's a lot of stuff in regards to North Carolina, and how could they can have a successful season. But the good thing is about the Tar Heels is that they have I wouldn't say an easy schedule, but definitely a manageable schedule, considering the fact that they're in a transition period. Right? If you look at the non-conference schedule, I mean, you got TCU, and that's going to be your hardest one, right? Then you have at Charlotte, and Charlotte, isn't really that great of a mid-major program. I mean, you should expect the Tar Heels to win that one. Then you got Richmond. That's an FCS opponent. You expect the Tar Heels to definitely win that one. And then you got to travel to UCF. Now, that could be a bit of a trap game because UCF historically has been a pretty tough place to play. And you also have a new head coach in Scott Frost who had a lot of success during this last stint at UCF. Of course, they went undefeated and won the Fiesta Bowl, and then not Fiesta Bowl, they went to the Peach Bowl, defeated Auburn, and they started calling themselves the national champions. So that happened the last time he was there. But that's a very manageable non-conference schedule. And matter of fact, if you beat TCU, there's a great chance that the Tar Heels could be 4-0 when they head into ACC play against Clemson, and they're also coming off of a bye week. So, I mean, that's a possibility. However, if you're looking at this schedule, you got to travel to Cal. And I know Cal lost a lot to the transfer portal. But you still have to travel from coast to coast. You still got to deal with the time zones. That could be a trap game as well. At Syracuse, yes, they may not have Cal McCord anymore, but the Carrier Dome is a very tough place to play. It is. And then you got the, Duke is returning a lot of players, and yes, they do lose Malik Murphy. Of course, he transferred to Oregon State, but they bring in Darren Mensah, who had a very successful season at Tulane as a redshirt freshman. I saw that firsthand because I'm originally from Louisiana. I covered a lot of college sports in Louisiana, especially LSU, but also watched Darren Mensah because my dad's a big Tulane guy. So he's a really good player. But then also that you got NC State, and yes, NC State is coming off of a 6-7 season. They're coming off a very similar situation to the Tar Heels, but they've beaten the Tar Heels the last 4 years. They've won the last 7 out of the last 9 meetings, and also the Tar Heels will play the Wolfpack in Raleigh. The Wolfpack have defeated the Tar Heels 3 out of the last 4 meetings in Raleigh. I mean, this is still, yes, it is a manageable schedule. It's not a ridiculously hard schedule, but this is looking at this team and what they have. There's going to be some hiccups along the way. This is a true transition period. And looking at the schedule, I would think this is I'd say as a ceiling, a 9-3 football team, right? Depending if luck hits their way. I think this is more of a 7-5, 8-4 team than it is, let's say, a 10-2 team. And look, I'm not saying they can't go 10-2, right? I'm not saying that, but being realistic and looking at what they have on the roster, you have to replace a lot of production. I do think they can win games. I think they could go 7-5, 8-4, which is a good season. Considering that you're in a transition period, and also this is the modern day of college athletics where you're in the transfer portal. You think you have a guy in the spring, but then you don't. He's transferring to Alabama or Ohio State or whatever, you name it. So it's a much tougher time to not only win football games in modern college football, but then to also win games in a transition period because you practically have to replace the whole roster. I do think that North Carolina will improve. I think where you're going to see them improve is on the defensive side of the ball. Steve Belichick did a phenomenal job at Washington. They were the second best defense against the pass. And what people don't realize about Steve Belichick and the job he did at Washington was that the year before we got there, Washington did not have a great defense, actually. Even though they went to the national championship, a lot of that is because of the crazy offense that they had. Of course, with Michael Penix and Rome Odunze doing their thing offensively, I mean, they're scoring all kinds of points. But if you look back at that defense allowed 406 yards per game, and especially 258 through the air. But if you look at what Washington last year, Washington was allowed 166.5. That was best for second in the country. And then even though they were still kind of weak, they were still relatively weak against the run. They were 87th nationally, and they allowed 161.8 yards per game. I mean, it was slightly worse than the year before. I mean, Washington only returned one or two stars in the defense last year. So the fact that they were still able to be the 28th best defense in the country, and then also now improve their passing statistics nearly 100 spots. They were able to be one of the better defenses. They were a top 30 defense. And the year before that, they were in the hundreds. So Steve Belichick does a great job of play calling. And I think that can transition to North Carolina, especially when in my opinion, the strongest position group they have, regardless of offense or defense, is the defensive backfield. They return Marcus Allen. Thaddeus Dixon transfers in. He's a solid player from Washington, and there's some familiarity with Steve Belichick's defense. Caleb Koss is coming back. Gavin Gibson transfers in from ECU, and Will Hardy, even though he hasn't been a regular starter at UNC, he's played a lot of football games, and that's valuable, and that's something that Bill Belichick likes. He likes to be around experienced players. I don't know how that can translate long term, especially because you cannot rely on the transfer portal for long periods of time. A great example of that's Florida State. They relied so much on the transfer portal that they forgot about the development of the younger guys, especially the high school recruits, and they went from having an undefeated regular season where they're the ACC champions to going 2-10 the next year. But I do think there's one area where this UNC football team can improve is the defense, because I do believe that their defensive backfield is arguably their strongest unit on this football team. And then on top of that, I trust Steve Belichick. I really trust the Belichicks in general, right? They're a very defensive-minded family. Bill Belichick is one of the greatest defensive strategists of all time. That's carried over to Steve. Steve's been a relatively successful defensive coordinator in both the pros and the college. And, of course, you got to mention the younger brother as well. the younger brother as well. And I think this defense has a chance to really improve. I'm not sure about the offense because I think they would have to rely on Gio Lopez a lot because he's a dual threat quarterback, and also Gio Lopez is um, the perfect quarterback for this moment, simply due to the fact that you really don't know who your offensive playmakers are going to be. And look, you lose Amarion Hampton, right? He became a first round draft pick. Then on top of that, you lose a solid bit of your receiving production. You lost both your tight ends and Bryson Nesbitt and John Copenhaver. Those are two of your biggest targets last season. Very solid tight ends. And and JJ Jones is gone. So you have a lot. You really don't have a whole lot of production coming back in the receiver room. And then also you lose arguably one of the best running backs um, in college football, right? Amarion Hampton was definitely a top 5 running back was definitely a top 5 running back last season. I mean, he was. And yeah, I mean, that's just, that's how it is. I mean, just with the modern day of the transfer portal, you have to figure out how you replace all those guys. And I just think with it being a transition period, you really don't know what this team is about. You have an idea what they're going to do defensively because of the experience. Most of their experience is on the defense side of the ball. A lot of those guys who start on the defense side of the ball have played a solid bit of football 3 or 4 years, or guys who have played under Steve Belichick, and that is Kamari House and Thaddeus Dixon, because of course they played for Steve Belichick at Washington. I think you're going to see a lot of improvement on the defense side of the ball, a lot of questions for the offense, and that will be time for another show. By the way, I mentioned the younger brother is Brian Belichick. I thought it was Brian, but I wanted to make sure. But but the thing is, I do trust the Belichick family. I know they got the distractions going on with the girlfriend or whatever. But I'm not here to talk about the girlfriend. I'm here to talk about their coaching regimen and then also the players on the team. But I do trust the Belichicks. I do trust their vision on what this team is going to be. It would be very interesting offensively, but I think this defense is good enough to win you games. And I think this is the first time in a while where you're going to see a very good UNC defense. Because usually UNC's offense has been lining up, but their defense has been so-so. But I think UNC has a great chance to win a good bit of games. I think they're a 7-5, 8-14, but they have the possibility to win more. It is a very manageable schedule, but it's a matter of how fast this team can gel together. But not only that, truly believe in Bill Belichick's vision for this program, and you'll start to see that September 1st, and we'll have some more breakdowns of TCU as we go along. Of course, we got a lot to talk about, and as we get closer to fall camp. And like I said, tomorrow we're going to talk more about SC Media Days, so check that out. But anyway, I'm your host, Grant Chachere. Thanks for joining the UNC Tar Heel on SI podcast, and I'll see you guys tomorrow. And also, make sure to follow us on Twitter and Facebook. We got our both those pages up, so make sure to go follow us at North Carolina Tar Heels on SI, and make sure to go follow us on Facebook as well. We just put up a Facebook, and we're going to be posting every single day. I can't tell you how many articles we're doing today, but it's probably about 20. But that's the kind of work we're doing over here on the North Carolina Tar Heels on SI website. So please make sure to go check that out. And I'll see you guys tomorrow to talk more about your North Carolina Tar Heels.